He ripped 5 women away from their families, many more narrowly escaping his grasp.
In the middle of the night, he'd stalk his prey before attacking. This is South Texas Crime Stories, the San Antonio Strangler.
She was a very good daughter. We miss her a lot.
Natalie Chavez was only 15 years old when she ran away from home. She was gone for a few months and was never reported missing by her mom or her stepdad. She tried to reach out a few times to ask if she could come home, but messages went unanswered.
She's run away before. We've got a missing person report on file for her from some time ago. She was not reported missing, though, when she was murdered.
On December 17th, 2014, Natalie sent another text to her stepfather saying she was ready to come home and she loved them. Her family, they never answered.
I felt like maybe if we would have answered, there's a lot of what ifs, if we would have answered, maybe this could have been avoided.
The teen's body was found the next morning at 10 a.m. under a bridge near the intersection of Veracruz and Nueva Leon Street. SAPD said she was found naked, the medical examiner saying her cause of death was strangulation. Police started looking for who was responsible for Natalie's death. They had one big help in the case: DNA. That's what led them to then 28-year-old Johnny Joe Avalos.
Avalos was arrested on April 21st, 2015 on a charge of sexual assault of a child based on the DNA evidence found on the body of Chavez. Investigators also believed that he was responsible for her death, but they didn't have enough to nail down their case yet. According to the arrest affidavit, Avalos told investigators he had sex with Chavez for a, quote, predetermined amount of money, but that he wasn't aware of how old she was. Then Police Chief Anthony Trevino says Avalos was a person of interest in 2 other disturbing cases.
On April 15th of 2015, Celia Lopez, age 29, was found dead in the 4400 block of South Presa. She had suffered trauma to her head and face. Just 11 days earlier, on April 4th, Genevieve Ramirez was found unconscious in a grassy alleyway in the 100 block of Avondale Avenue. According to SAPD, she was nude from the waist down and had bruising, but no obvious signs of trauma. Ramirez was hospitalized but died from her injuries 2 months later. It took 1 year and 7 months, but finally Bexar County District Attorney Nicola Hood handed down 2 indictments alleging Avalos had killed 4 women between December 2014 to April 2015.
His victims were Natalie Chavez, 15, Rosemary Perez, 28, Celia Lopez, 29, and Genevieve Ramirez, 46. The indictments say Avalos asphyxiated each victim with his hand and arm, also using plastic bags on 3 of them. It was later revealed in court Avalos' killing stretched back to October 2012. His first victim believed to be 25-year-old Vanessa Lopez. She was found in the San Antonio River in a portion of Mission Reach. Investigators believe she had been in the water for several days before she was found.
Court records introduced in February 2019 explain that Avalos would stalk women, primarily sex workers, in the middle of the night on the south side after he got off of work as a dishwasher at a restaurant near downtown. He claims at least 20 other women he tried to attack got away. In court, Avalos pled guilty to the capital murder charges against him and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He was evaluated and determined to be intellectually disabled. Because of this, prosecutors opted not to seek the death penalty against him. After the hearing, Natalie's stepfather had a chance to speak to Avalos in court.
I thought it would be satisfying, but, it wasn't. It's still, nothing's going to change.
Hello, KSAT viewers. I'm Stefania Jimenez, anchor and reporter at KSAT 12 in San Antonio. On weeknights, you'll catch me on the Night Beat. Many of you want the news before 10 p.m., and this is for you. It's called The 9 at Night, a live 9-minute digital newscast airing at, you guessed it, 9 p.m. Call it a bite-sized show that's tailor-made for you. You'll get the day's top stories, weather, upcoming community events, and feel-good stories. Find us on YouTube, ksat.com, and KSAT Plus available on Amazon Fire Stick, Apple TV, Roku, or any way you stream, and of course, via podcast. So like or subscribe wherever you get your audio. That way you'll get the alert when each episode drops. That starts later this month. Until then, head on over to ksat.com and sign up to be a KSAT Insider. That's where you'll get the inside scoops on all of our new and exciting projects.
With this case, I think it's unique because prosecutors made a point to say they were not going to seek the death penalty in it. Yeah, so the assistant DA, David Lunan, explained the definition of intellectually disabled is determined by state law and begins with an IQ examination with 70 or below as a starting point. And he had said in a quote, when we look at the IQ and then combine that with what other adaptive deficits have been demonstrated, he said other considerations, including cognitive reasoning and judgment abilities, given Avalos' intellectual status to execute him, would then violate his Eighth Amendment rights that guarantee protection from cruel and unusual punishment. So that's why they didn't seek the death penalty in this case, because he was intellectually disabled.
Yeah, and at that point, if they did and he got the death penalty, they would appeal and go back through the process again. So that was the best that they could get him, was that life without parole. So for this episode, Lee, you got the chance to sit down with SAPD Detective Mark Duke and Detective Leroy Carillon, who were on these cases.
Yeah, it was very interesting, and they said they don't have a fan club, but I think that you and I would like to join the fan club. We'll just get it started. We'll get their faces put on t-shirts, because they were both just so intelligent, so calm whenever they were talking about how they go about looking into cases. And I was with our photographer, Joey Arredondo, and he was saying, like, he also asked the question, you guys are just both so calm, so level-headed. Have you always been like this? And they both pretty much said, well, yeah, that's what you have to do when you look into something like this.
Yeah, I would expect that. And I didn't know this at the time. If you remember when we covered the Otis McCain trial, Detective Duke was the lead detective on this case, and he testified. We, of course, covered it. So some of you may remember who he is, what he looks like, but he has a lot more experience than I even knew, Lee.
Yeah, this was so interesting. So Detective Duke is the only active trained criminal profiler in the state of Texas. He's trained under the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, the Texas Rangers, and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. So it was a fellowship training that he took part of, and it took 5 years to complete. So he's been with SAPD for about 27 and a half years, and he's been a homicide detective for 12 years. Now, Detective Carillon, he also has so much experience too. So sitting with these two men, Carillon had joined the academy in 1994, graduated that following year, and in 2008, he was promoted to detective, and that's where he's been ever since in homicide. And their level of expertise, how they approach their different cases, it was just so, I mean, honestly, I just could listen to them all day. We sat down with them for about an hour talking about these two cases, why they got into it, and their reasonings for getting into this background is because they just wanted to do the most good for people. They wanted to just do the most right that they could by victims.
And I'm sure these two cases, I'm sure they're detectives for multiple cases, but particularly this case with Johnny Avalos, I'm sure sticks with them. And I think it's why they wanted to talk about it as well.
Well, exactly. And so the way that they approached each of these, Detective Duke worked on Vanessa Lopez's case, which we know now is Avalos's first murder that he claims to have done. And Detective Carillon worked on Natalie Chavez's case, and he has a relationship to this day with Natalie's parents. So let's hear what they had to say about their cases.
I knew the condition of what, and the surroundings, how we found Natalie, like I just said, it was going to be difficult. I knew what we collected at the scene was going to be very important, probably to identify who did this, and we were able to make those decisions, finding evidence, and then of course the crime lab was huge in this particular case.
Vanessa, her life was taken a couple of years earlier in 2012. It was We believe it was October 26th. And the way we pinpointed that is she was found about 7 miles away from where he had left her. And we had a heavy rainstorm where we got about 1.5 inches of rain in a very short period of time, but it rose the level of the creek by about 5 feet. And so she washed downstream about 7 miles and was recovered in Espada Park. So we believe that was his first homicide. That's what he says, and we don't have any reason to not believe that, although we do know that they only tell us what they want to tell us. You know, we have to work through that and try and get evidence that matches that. You have to let the evidence drive the case. But we believe she was the first one that he killed.
So eventually they do figure out who's committing these crimes, and DNA was probably their best evidence in this case, as they all kind of matched up. When they sat down with Avalos to discuss the crimes, Detective Duke explained he found an odd pleasure in describing what he did. That's very eerie to me.
Very eerie, and just hearing him go into the details of it, just a little bit of viewer warning, I guess, for this part.
You know, there's only 3 ways to solve a crime, and that's physical evidence, eyewitness testimony, or a confession. And physical evidence only leads to an arrest and successful prosecution about 13% of the time. So that means the 80+% of other crimes that are solved come from the other 2, eyewitness testimony or confessions. For him, he's a different animal. The type person he is, he enjoys reliving these events in his life. And so for him, it was pleasurable to talk about it and to tell about it. And you could even see it on his face when he was reliving it.
Now, shortly after Detective Carrion had started on Natalie's case, there was another death. And I think with detectives, a lot of it is, fact-finding, but also trusting their gut instinct. And so Detective Carrion had a gut instinct when it came to this case. And that gut instinct proved to be something worthwhile. So he started collaborating with the detective on that other recent death case. And they were able to really start matching and creating those links and figure out what was happening here.
There's got to be something here. There's a link. I said, let's send off what your findings are with our findings and submit it to the crime lab and see if there's a match. And there was. That kind of started, there's more victims. And I started reaching out to all the detectives in the office. I'm like, do you have a case that kind of matches a female, kind of matches the profile victim? And boom, there was. We found several others.
I think that's really interesting, because I don't think a lot of people realize when a detective gets assigned a case, it's their case. And then another murder happens, it's the next one that falls in line that gets it. They kind of have an order. So for him to be like, these sound all too familiar, and kind of put that link together, I thought that was very smart of him to do, and a really good detective. It shows what kind of detective he is.
Yeah, and it also just shows that, SAPD is willing to work together to figure out, okay, we think there's a bigger problem here. It's not just one and done murders. There's something happening here. So when DNA matched Johnny Avalos, both Carrion and Duke were surprised, because he was never someone that was on their radar. He was never a name that was thrown out. Carrion said he had calls and calls and calls from other parents wondering where their kids were, like international calls. And he said that broke his heart. But, Avalos' name never popped up with any of it. On the streets, he asked people, never popped up. So it was a surprise for them.
So it was